Welcome, everyone, to Alaska Quarterly Review's first event of the 2021-22 season. I am Ronald Spatz, the editor-in-chief of Alaska Quarterly Review, and excited to welcome you to a great event, one that will be recorded and will be available on the Alaska Quarterly Review YouTube channel for future viewing. Before we begin, I'd like to make a few important acknowledgments. We gratefully acknowledge Web 907 for its technical support and the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, Alaska Quarterly Review's 501c3 umbrella organization, which makes this event possible. I also want to make a land acknowledgement. Alaska Quarterly Review recognizes the indigenous land on which all Alaskans live. AQR is located in Anchorage, and Anchorage is Dena'ina homeland. Dena'ina is the language spoken by the traditional, present, and future caretakers of this land. Land acknowledgement opens a space with gratefulness and respect for the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspective of Indigenous peoples and marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. This evening, we're absolutely delighted to host two Alaskan nonfiction writers, Keema Waterfield and Corinna Cook. Both have recently published their first books, and we are just delighted to have them start our year. I will introduce them now, and they will read in sequence. That will be followed by a conversation in the time that we have remaining. Keema Waterfield is an author of the memoir Inside Passage, published by Green Writers Press this year, that Kirkus Reviews deemed a deeply stirring story of innocence lost and family found. Nancy Lord wrote in her review in the Anchorage Daily News that Inside Passage shows us the power of family love, however complicated by circumstances, when it pairs up with a child's fierce determination and the good hearts of others. Keema's nonfiction has appeared in Brevity, Redivider, The New York Times, and Wired. Her essay, You Will Find Me in the Starred Sky, was named a notable in the Best American Essays of 2017. Keema received an MFA in creative writing nonfiction from the University of Montana. Corinna Cook is the author of Leavetakings, an essay collection published by the University of Alaska Press in 2020. Of the collection, Joni Tevis observed, "This lovely book teaches us how to examine and cherish the places where we find ourselves, no matter what rivers carried us here." Corinna's nonfiction has appeared in publications including Flyway, Alaska Quarterly Review, Ocean State Review, and Alaska Magazine. Her academic writing appears in Essay, a journal of nonfiction studies and new writing, the International Journal for the Theory of Creative Writing and Pedagogy, and American Literary Studies. Corinna earned a PhD in English and Creative Writing from the University of Missouri with the support of a 2018-19 Fulbright Fellowship, a 2018 Alaska Literary Award, and a 2020 Rasmussen Foundation Project Award. She is now writing a book that looks at contemporary Alaska and Yukon artworks and searches for ways to live with colonial history. So I'm delighted to begin this program by turning it over to Corinna Waterfield. Keema Waterfield, I'm sorry.
Keema Waterfield.
Yeah, right. I got them both wrong. Go ahead. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Keema Waterfield, and I'm reading to you from my memoir, Inside Passage. with kitten stuff on it. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I live and write on Salish and Glispe land, and to express my gratitude to Alaska Quarterly Review and to you, Ron Spatz, for hosting us. I'm so honored to be here with you, Corinna. Inside Passage is a coming-of-age story set on the coast of Southeast and South Central Alaska, where I began performing at a very young age at folk festivals alongside my sister and my wild young hippie mother. There's a lot of music and love in these pages, a whole lot of travel by ferry and car, and there is some hardship in this story, as well as a lot of light that looks into the darkness. And I'm going to read to you from a bit of both of those places. The first section is from The Hard One. You don't need to know much to get into this chapter, except for that at this point we have fled several times from my pot-dealing father, many moves in the dead of night, and we have met my future stepdad, Tom. The Hard One. I want to spare you this part of my story because it is dark and hard, but also because it may be difficult to believe that what happens next isn't my entire life story. Well, in a way it is, and in another way it isn't. It is because it shaped me, and it isn't because what happened warped the weave, but I wove myself whole out of remnants in spite of it. I've chosen to leave this hard time here because without it, I am incomplete. I grew up and through this the way a tree will absorb an obstacle in its path over time. I am a stubborn Sitka spruce with the bones of this story embedded in my flesh. I will show you the marks on my body. I fear them no more. When I think back to our time with Ray, it's easiest if I put myself in my mother's shoes. Here is Fawn, an artist with 2 toddler girls and big dreams. She is engaged to marry an ambitious and intelligent young man who makes her doubt everything she thinks is beautiful about herself, despite his devotion. At the airport, where she's gone to buy the groom's plane ticket north for the wedding, she meets a tall man, thin with dark hair and an eye patch. He's an artist too, he tells her, and a musician. He talks her into grabbing a cup of coffee at the nearby diner when he hears she has 2 little girls. She sees in Ray a kindred spirit. He confesses he's always wanted a family. In fact, has a big old house in Washington, an inheritance just waiting for him to fill it with laughter. They talk about art and love and being misunderstood. She says no to dinner so many times she finally says yes, and soon she's on the phone with her fiance calling off the wedding. What about the girls? Tom asks. It's me you want to marry, she tells him. You don't understand. Me. We didn't return to Oregon in the fall after leaving Petersburg, but moved to Ray's hometown, Bremerton, Washington, instead. Mom transferred her student loans to the community college there and put money down on an apartment, refusing to move in with Ray at first. It's just for now, she told him. He had a habit of sulking that unnerved her. An article had run in the local paper shortly after our move, announcing a new sex offender crimes against minors registry in Seattle. It's about damn time, she said to Ray, who sat silent on the couch a long time before replying. Sometimes kids are sexy, though, he said finally. They just act sexy, don't you think? What the hell are you talking about? She said, afraid her trembling tongue might give her away. Kids don't know what sexy even means. She'd carried the secret of her childhood so long she didn't know how to give voice to it. He'd stalked out of the house then. He became morose after that, mopey even. He'd visit and sit on her couch in the darkest corner, staring at the ceiling for hours on end. Years later, she tells me she worried that he'd suspected her secret, that he resented her, thought her tainted. She thanked her lucky stars that she'd had girls, no sons to do to us what her brother had done to her, no crazy family to endanger us. After a couple of months, Mom drove to Oregon to pick up our belongings, leaving us with Ray for the handful of days it took to gather what little we had in storage. Tom had agreed to help her bring our things to Bremerton. He loved her, even then. Tom was sad, she said. He missed us, but I think he understood why I felt I belonged with someone more like me. I remember those days we were left with Ray, with the accuracy of a 3-year-old child. Gray light filters through a high square window at the end of the bedroom Tekla and I share. The pillow I lie on is soaked through with tears. I am on the top bunk in our small bedroom, shivering and crying silently, while Tekla in the bunk below screams the kind of scream that makes your own throat hurt just listening. At daycare in Petersburg, they'd called her the screamer for her fits. This isn't the same thing, and I know it. At 3 years old, I don't understand most of what Ray says, only the cruelty of it. You think you're so sexy, don't you? Walking around like you own the world. I see the way you look at me. Think you're smart? Thought I wouldn't notice you? You are nothing, and no one cares what happens to you. The gun he shows me is black as the patch over his left eye, and the smell of it makes my nose curl when he wands it over my body, head to toe. I know without a doubt what he means when he presses the gun to my temple and says, "If you tell your mother, I will kill her." I choose not to remember the feel of his hands on me. I don't remember pain. The memories are there, but consciously muted. I've learned what I can from them by now. I don't need them anymore. Instead, I remember mostly what I wanted to climb from my bunk into Tekla's and hold her until Mom came back from wherever she'd gone and we were safe. When Ray finally left us a few days later, I clamped my jaws against the possibility of his return, readying myself to bite his throat out. I knew he would kill me for trying. I think I even grasped the concept of death then, of nothingness. I yearned for it plenty in those days. I knew it for a price I would gladly pay if I could save my sister one more moment of pain. Though I never saw him again, it took 30 years, 2 broken teeth, and thousands of dollars in mouth guards before I finally loosened my grip on his throat. Mom and Tom returned to our apartment in Bremerton to find the doors wide open, lights off. No Ray, no kids, no note. There was no answer at Ray's or their old boss's house or our downstairs neighbors. "Where are my fucking children?" Mom screamed out the window. "Someone must know something," Tom said. They raced through the neighboring apartment buildings, Mom weeping and pounding bruises into her fists on every door, until she heard Tekla wailing in a nearby apartment. "I found them wandering around," the neighbor lady said. She was a total stranger. "They were just filthy, all dirty diapers, screaming hungry, and nobody there with them. I didn't know where they came from." It's anyone's guess how long we'd been left there, alone in the apartment, before we made our way outside. I only began to piece it together in my late 20s. The events around that time remain fragmented, the timeline imprecise. Even my own memories are hard to pin down. As for my mother, imagine your grown child asking you for the particulars of an episode no other adult witnessed, the anguish of so many unanswerable questions. Still, I'm thankful for my mother's strength and her willingness to look hard at that time of our lives with me. I could have been left alone with my memories, the way she had been. When asked 2 decades later, Tom first said, "Are you sure you want to dig into this? Some things are better left alone." And Mom said, "It's complicated. Ray groomed us all so thoroughly, I couldn't tell you if the sun was out or the stars during those few months we were together." We had talked about it a lot in the early years, though, on the advice of a family therapist. "Do you remember Ray?" Mom would ask. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I didn't admit it. Always, though, exhaustion overwhelmed me when I heard his name, a heavy-eyed paralysis that left me feeling impossibly unreal. "The therapist said we couldn't let you bury it," Mom told me years later. But Grandma, who didn't yet know about her own daughter's torments, worried about dwelling on it too much, lest we become obsessed with it and never let it go. "Talk about it," she said, "just not too much." Despite everyone's efforts, the facts scrambled. The more I tried to explain to myself how we wound up with Ray, the more things went fuzzy. As the years passed, I heard mixed stories from family members. I confused movie plots with reality. I filled in the blanks, as children do. For a long time, I thought Ray was a drug dealer, that my mother had left us with him to pick up a shipment of weed from her brother in Petersburg. I thought she had already married Tom and was having an affair with Ray. I thought it happened in Portland. Because we were in Washington so short a time, I don't recall the streetlights of Bremerton, whether there are mountains there or if it rains half the year. I thought Ray had been a bad guy through and through. I thought Mom had known it and left us with him anyway. This is the faulty logic of a child, and there is no cure for the regret of it. I will never know who I might have been without Ray in my story, but it's not hard to guess at the sorrows I'd have owned without my mother there to help me carry the memory of him. I'm thankful for that. She knew what silence could do to a person. This too shall pass, Mom said, when the weight of it all drew our heads to her shoulders. Then she gathered us girls in until we were a mess of heartbeats and legs, tangled roots reaching down into the warmth of her. My arms are big enough to hold us all until then. We grew up together in that way. The next segment I'm going to read offers a glimpse into the joyful noise I grew up in. Because while there is trauma in this story, it is not a trauma story. It is a story of love, a mother-daughter love. And I think this segment sets the scene of this bonded unit that has persisted across the miles and decades. This is called The Sound of Things. Because we never stayed in place long enough for home to land on a smell or fix itself to a room, it settled on a sound. A lone alto voice rises from the living room as Mom fingerpicks her way through a favorite Bill Staines tune, Piney River Girl. I heard the sound of a redbird sing and the call of a whippoorwill. The kitchen is thick with the aroma of onion and garlic and ground beef. Tekla stands at the sink, up to her elbow in sudsy water. At the stove, I wrap up leftover enchiladas for lunch, dreading the unfinished math homework ahead of me. Tekla hums along, rinses a plate, and jumps in with her high soprano. I follow, but an octave above Mom, because I don't have the knack for picking out a harmony the way Tekla does. In the living room, Mom shifts to a low harmony, letting me drop into the melody while Tekla lays high notes over ours. As the sun pulled over the eastern ridges and warmed the morning hills. We don't plan. We don't rehearse. We don't say, how about some music while we do the dishes, Ma? We are chicks in a nest. Mom chirps out a melody and we sing it right back. Our life is a series of school days and rainy weekends in bed with books, peppered with an ongoing stream of music festivals and jam nights and gigs, where Mom plays music with an orbiting cast of stoned guitar players, serious fiddlers, and tipsy stand-up bassists. We miss a lot of school for music. Our teachers don't mind because we always turn in our homework, and they couldn't stop us anyway. Whenever Mom surprise invited us girls up on stage during a show, we'd say, we don't know any songs. And she'd say, what are you talking about? You've been singing these songs all your life. Then we'd lean into the mic and find our way home together, the look in Mom's eyes saying, I wouldn't rather be anywhere else. Afterward, people would come up and say, how did you teach your girls to sing like that? Which gave Mom an opportunity to show off her gap teeth with a smile. I only ever taught them to listen, she'd say. They did the rest. Wherever we lived, you could count on Mom to leave her little black notebook of songs and a dog-eared copy of Rise Up Singing stacked on the coffee table. They'd lay there like a pair of well-meaning elderly aunts I couldn't shake. You could get serious about music if you wanted to, they seemed to say whenever I wandered past. But I'd carry on picking at a blueberry stain or digging mud out of the cuffs of my jeans because getting serious seemed like an unbearable amount of work. I preferred the effortless way Mom dragged us into her songs by playing them over and over and over so that on the bus ride to school I'd catch myself singing St. James Infirmary blues and wondering at the heartbreak of it. Let her go, let her go, let her go. God rest her wherever she may be. The instruments always had a corner of their own in the living room too, where the shadows they cast could most easily scare the bejesus out of you on your way to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Mom had a cello several guitars, a fiddle, a mandolin, and for a few years, a hammered dulcimer. While I could pick out a tune by ear on any of them, I only ever had serious feelings for Bessie, the cello, which I blame on the fact that Mom played Bessie while pregnant with me. The first voice I ever knew was my mother's. The second was Bessie's. Bessie stood taller than I until 5th grade, a full-sized cello with a voice so deep and rich it fell on me like a prayer. I knew the shape of her the way I knew my mother's face, and when I plucked her strings, she drew me back to my mother's belly. She tied us together. I can hear her deep voice still, Mom plucking her like a bass from her lowest growl to a high C on Sweet Lorraine. And each night he prays that nobody steals her heart away. Eventually, I got my own cello. It was a cheap cast-off the music teacher at White Cliff Elementary in Ketchikan gave to me because it looked like it had been left in a bathtub overnight. After that, playing the cello was just more homework. You could be great if you'd practice, my orchestra and choir teachers said. I didn't know how to say to them, I don't want to be great. I just want to hear the pretty noise and sing when it feels right. So I said nothing. Like this, she said, pressing my fingers into the shape of an A minor chord. Now strum from the 2nd string. I ran a thumb across the strings, feeling the weight of them as they sprang free, each one sending a warm buzz from the fretboard to my brain. Now an E, she said, moving my fingers. I aimed wide eyes at my mother and hummed, strumming again. Mom brushed a hank of long hair behind an ear and smiled all the way up to her eyes. We sat on a musty couch in a windowless old house somewhere on Douglas Island, a house we lived in so short a time I can't remember the shape of it, whether there were stairs to the front door, or how far it was from either the beach or the bridge spanning Gastineau Channel that delivered us daily to Juneau for school and work. The guitar was a nameless old thing that had seen better days before my mother found it at a thrift store. Deep scratches ran the length of its back, and the decorative pattern encircling the sound hole had rubbed off. I didn't mind, because the sound it made felt like campfire on a cold, starry night. Shoot, you could practically write a song with just those 2 chords, Mom said. And I have, in high school as a lonely teen trying out heartbreak, in my 20s when I came back to music after a decade of trying to give it up for good. Now again in my 30s writing songs with my band. This wandering heart is lonesome as a windowless room. I hear my mother and sister when a new song tugs at me. Tekla's fierce highs and my mother's crooning lows, their harmonies ghosting across state lines and time zones to find me. In those moments, I feel them out there, my heart sirens, calling me home.
Thank you, Keema. That was wonderful.
All right, I'll take it from here. Thanks, Keema. It's really, really special reading with you. I am just, it's so exciting to encounter all these deeply familiar people and places and events in your pages. So thank you for giving me that experience. Thank you also to AQR, Alaska Quarterly Review, and thank you, Ron, for organizing and inviting us, and thank you for the introductions as well. Let's see. This is my book. It's called Leavetakings. Each essay has roots in my life, so in that sense, it's quite personal. Each essay is committed to thinking through a question or following an idea, as you know, as far as it will take me. So in that sense, it's a collection that's pretty invested in following a line of thought, maybe more so than in properly telling a story. An overarching pattern in the collection involves themes of really coming and going. I'm interested in touchstones. I'm interested in memories that we continually return to. I'm interested in places that we repeatedly return to also. So this collection follows a few such repetitions through time. For example, I was born and raised in Juneau, and I grew up out North Douglas, and I'm always writing about going back to North Douglas. For one, in real life, I always am going back to North Douglas. But what's interesting about that to me is how it activates my mind, it activates my spirit. It's just, it's the opposite of autopilot. It's totally electrifying. So that's a life pattern that's written into this book. Other themes include landscape and friendship, loyalty and loneliness. Friendship in particular is important to the collection. And I'll speak to that since I'm going to read about friendship. Sometimes I sum up the book in one sentence as a collection of Northern sorrows and friendships. And I write about friendship, I think, because in contrast to romance, friendship is a site of somewhat underexplored, deep mystical connection and stupendous unresolvable conflict, and really inexplicable loss. Romance is interesting for, I think, very similar reasons, that we do have rock and roll, right? We have the entire literary tradition of rock and roll. So there's been a lot of cultural exploration that's gone into romance. And I just think friendship a little less so. So I have questions. The essay that Ron asked me to read tonight is one of my friendship pieces. It's called Confetti. And before my book came out, Confetti first appeared in Alaska Quarterly Review. So I will read it in deep appreciation for AQR, a publication that really boosted me early on when I was just in my really earliest exploratory stages of finding out what the essay is and can be. And, and now the essay is like my home, one of my homes. So that was a really special time, and I appreciate AQR's role in it. One more note about Confetti. Confetti is a character profile. I read a lot of character profiles. I'm really taken by the profile as a mode of inquiry because there is inside of me some kind of alien robot creature who's always like beep boop pop, like how to decode humans. And the heart of a profile is always some version of the question, what is going on with this person? To me, that's like quite an interesting question. And I find it's a particularly significant question in the arena of friendship. So I'll close by just observing that studying people out of a sense of some of this alienation I'm expressing. It's alienation, but it's not bad. I just feel like I should say that, it opens up pretty tender connection of all things. So without further ado, this is Confetti. It opens with an epigraph from a children's book. So it's a couple lines of poetry that my mom and I often say back and forth to each other, and we can't figure out what on earth book this came from, but it goes like this. Their ears are large, their feet are small. They haven't any chins at all, but I think mice are rather nice. All right, here's the essay. Marian's fingers are a little bit longer than warranted by such a slight body, and her joints point sharply. The effect is elfin. And rather like mice, she doesn't have any to speak of. What was the most beautiful part of your day? She will ask me, being, delighting in my hesitation, my uncertainty. When I can't think of what to say, I resort to deflection. I turn the question back to Marian, and she will give me an immediate answer. The moment a crisp banjo string snaps under her fingers, perhaps, or the raven's chaotic involvement in her afternoon at the dump, or better yet, the cold pepperoni pizza a lady in green covertly shared with her upstairs in the bookstore. When all I do is blank, Marian will throw the thinnest arms around my neck, calling me adorkable, and nuzzling her way into a snuggle from which I won't be able to disentangle either my limbs or my once independent mind. Much like a stick figure pressing onward through the squares of a cartoon, Marian walks bent too far forward at the waist. She must be nursing some protracted ailment of the lungs. Perhaps her ribs are too fragile to properly house the collection of vital organs impossibly lodged inside her paper thinness. Should she ever straighten her shoulders and throw back her head, one can only assume her skeleton would snap dryly to pieces like uncooked spaghetti noodles, but the image may be unnecessary. Recent periods of adolescent homelessness and indigence all but confirm my hunch that Marian suffers from some unmitigated pulmonary disorder that causes her to bend unthinking from the waist, even as she springs from this side of the parking lot to that and back again. But sympathy here confuses the experience at hand. When my worries go toward lung disease, songbirds leapfrog in waves overhead, dizzying my eyes skyward glance, as Marian, tugging my wrist, brightly welcomes me to the old green van. This is her new home, a whimsically decorated, broken down shell of a vehicle with a drooping mattress in back, the very first private space she has called her own. Its seats have long since been removed, and the plywood floor is well swept, but there's no denying the accumulated cigarette butts lining the cracks between wood and van wall, nor the single camp pot encrusted with the remnants of some weeks-old meal given to her by a bewildered new friend, taken by the notion that someone as full of life as Marian ought to eat something, anything. Her skeletal thinness is, after all, so eerie. Marian doesn't think to give the pot back. She hasn't anything to cook in it and no thought of acquiring anything to cook anyway. It never occurs to her that the pot's original owner might have a habit of cooking and eating food herself, daily even, and so might miss it. Marian imagines many beautiful things, like cavorting unicorns and tambourine-playing owls and knit caps the color of streaming sunshine, all of which translate into the trance-like guitar solos as long, loose fingers of hers unhinge from any stray instrument she gets a hold of, but she does not imagine such things as other people's habits. Nor does she imagine that a winter nighttime walk across town will beat the buoyancy of her mood, but it does. I will soon be driving Marian out to a bar to cheer her up. When she realizes she may lose a couple of her toes to frostbite, this is her request. This is her request because last night she was sitting on someone's kitchen counter, listlessly flopping the phone cord back and forth. Pain? Yeah, it hurts pretty bad, she had said into the phone. Then, can't tell. My fingers might still be too numb. No, yeah, I'll use a fork. Okay, let's say yes, I can feel my toes. And yes, it's painful. The nurse on the other end of the line must have asked what color they were, because Marian had shouted red as if a right answer delivered at top volume had the potential to win her a prize. A sticky one, probably, of the sort discovered in the bottom of a box of Cracker Jacks. Well, as long as her toes aren't gray. Define gray, Marian had said. I mean, I guess yes. So 10 gray ones. Well, as long as she hasn't been rubbing them. I wasn't supposed to rub them? This one had generally piqued her curiosity. Well, as long as there aren't any blisters. I'd say I have quite a few blisters. Shall I count? Well, as long as she leaves them alone and lets them pop naturally. Okay, but a few of them popped while I was rubbing them just now. There had been a scramble on the other end of the line and stern talk of infection. Marian thanked the nurse, accepted a small stash of someone's dog's leftover antibiotics, wandered out of the kitchen, and eventually left the apartment. No one was really sure afterward whether they ought to have helped her home. The next morning, she ate chocolate ice cream for breakfast in her van, and now she wants to go out And because I am confounded not only by the combination of potential amputation and chocolate ice cream, but even more so by my recollection that Marian looked so whitish and limp on that kitchen counter, I will not drive her to a health clinic at all because she doesn't feel like it, but to a bar because she does. Although I'm driving, I still see the sharp edge of the kitchen counter cutting into her soft thighs. I glance like the responsible driver I am from the double yellow line between lanes to the single white one, but mostly I just see her spindly legs dangling in the air. It occurs to me that perhaps her feet never consorted much with the earth in the first place, that Marian does more floating than anything else, that she should see a doctor, that I don't really like this bar we're going to, that my stomach is still sour from its sudden start at the sight of those limp legs hanging off the edge of the kitchen counter, legs that just buckled beneath her when Marian tried to launch herself into the air after hanging up the phone. These are the things that will occur to me, but the things I know to be reasonable sometimes lose their shape in my dealings with Marian, and I'll find I have no hesitation to do what she so sweetly and incomprehensibly wishes. As I drive, Marian suddenly thrills at the opportunity to play a Patsy Cline cassette on her battery-operated tape deck. For some reason, neither of us turn off the car radio. The Subaru is filled with two musics at once, discordant, disjointed sound qualities clashing from the mismatch of the car's speakers and those of the tape deck. Maybe Marian and I are also trying to talk to each other over Patsy and the radio, and maybe not. Eventually, when for sure there is nothing really to say, Marian just holds my gaze with her gleeful, silent smile. She is pressing me into a most distant sense of solitude. It is fitting, then, that I am reduced to a clinging, giggling mess as arm in arm, Marian and I fuse into a single, flailing, wool-clad creature attempting to gain purchase on the ice-flicked incline leading to the bar's front steps. After a minute, this becomes maddening. If only that bottom step were within reach, but the innocent thwarting of simple intentions is met with as much apology as one can expect of a confetti-filled firecracker, and the night leaves me to my own devices. When we do make it inside the smoke-filled barroom, Marian and I step apart. She's comfortable here. But I feel kind of like an unhitched trailer, reliant upon the motor power of another vehicle and inconvenient to tow in a crosswind. Still, I'm here. And so I shed one or two outer layers to keep busy, meaning to disguise my squeamishness about wool's absorption of cigarette smoke. I toss a sweater here and a scarf there with false insouciance. Marian has already limped over to the wicker chairs and back. Nearby, someone's guitar case sits open and empty on the floor. Yellow flames leap from the grill where squealing women are flipping burgers. Someone's dog is wandering bar stool to bar stool. The surprising number of empty beer pitchers sitting on all the room's available surfaces suggests no one is particularly concerned with bussing the tables tonight. The talk is gruff and accusatory and careless. Marian, head bowed and rocking, eyes closed, mouth expressionless, a neck crooked at a heart-wrenching angle, recalling the rigor mortis of a broken bird, plays someone's guitar. That is when the absence of a chin strikes me not as comely or cute, but as tragic. Marian plays with the enormity of a heart that intends to spend itself hard and fast, and her chin that isn't there has left its space to the impossible crook of her spine. From the front, all I see is the rolling crown of her head and the bony, ice-colored nape of her neck in the light of the bar's neon beer signs. But her fingers are prideful of their long slenderness and eager to be gazed at. They move to be seen. They do. Like this, Marian plays folk music with a flair of the Baroque. It's not stylistic in its formality, but in its water-like repetitions, its tumbling variations, its allegiance to a theme. She is bent and broken and entranced over an acoustic guitar that I know is filled simply with air, but which appears truly to be her only anchor to these floorboards. The planks underfoot groan with the weight of everyone else's lurching steps. Yet as she plays, Marion's physicality blends with the notes as a vapor. The music is at once flighty and fleeting, yet persistent. It's made of an otherworldly plucking, yet pours out as if from a mass warbling contingent of chickadees. The branches off of which such tiny birds flit can be seen as thin and slight as sticks of incense. On cue, the smoke in the bar takes on the dry scent of jasmine and ginger. I linger, disoriented, holding a couple of $2 mystery beers and unsure of where to set them. Marion is perched in a tree, her toes unfrozen and strong and curled around a high branch's skyward twigs. Of course she is still embracing a guitar. Of course her thin neck still bends impossibly, all but broken, before the force of her fingers abandon. From the ground, I hear not the notes but their form, the pattern stated and restated so quickly and seamlessly as to achieve a chant-like lull, broken only with the most disconcerting chord change that does not touch the spilling pattern of sound but changes it unalterably, like light shifting over the bustling army of tiny birds whose winter lives I can't quite fathom. Thank you.
Yeah, that was wonderful, Corinna. So we had a great reading, and now I'm hoping we can have a little bit of conversation. And we had wonderful characters that you've brought to the screen today. And I wondered about place and people. What is it that really frames your writing and your thinking? You both consider yourselves Alaska writers. But what is it about place that's important to you and your work? How does it inform what you think or what you do or what you hope to have happen and that sort of thing?
Keema, do you want to go first since I just took a chunk of time reading?
No, I'm ready. I'm ready to hear what you have to say.
Oh, preposterous. Okay. I mean, my answer about place is very simple. My places are my most essential building blocks. I mean, to me, it's chemistry. It's what everything is made out of anyway. So that's what I use. We had spoken some earlier about what it means to, really see yourself as an Alaskan writer. And when I was thinking about that, I just felt that the main thing about writing is thinking. I use writing to try and think smarter, which, that I don't think that the Alaska part to that, it doesn't add or subtract anything from this quite laborious heart of it, which is to hatch ideas and grow them. But another way to get at that question is to say that maybe my goal as a person is that I want to live in a world of increasingly more thoughtful people. So what does it mean to me to be a Northern writer working toward that goal? It means I want Northerners to encounter more and more to think expansively about, and it means I want Southerners to think more expansively about the North. So writing is my, public facing zone of contact where maybe I get to spark thinking, my own and others. What's your thoughts, Keema?
Yeah, I'm resonating with that a lot. Growing up bookish in the 1980s era, Southeast Alaska is really perfect if you need to escape the rain and lonesomeness. But I found it filled me with a lot of questions because I was like, who are these kids that I'm reading about in my library books with like their strip malls and, massive sports stadiums and like roadways, like road systems that can take you from one end of the country to the other. I felt like I lived a galaxy over from the rest of this country that we were supposedly a part of. And as a kid, I really pined for more northern stories, more nonfiction stories that were set in the wild northern places that I felt like I could connect to, so that I could see myself in the world somehow. It took a long time before I realized that I was going to just start writing some of that myself. And as much as the places, many places all over Alaska shaped me, ultimately, in writing a memoir, you get to write the story of where you are. And that's where I was. And the place deeply impacted who I became, the people that I grew up among. One thing that I have been thinking a lot about was, especially in the writing of this, was that I wasn't positioned to speak to the systemic colonialist infringements Alaskan Natives experienced across the board. And because I couldn't write about that from my child narrator's perspective, I spent a lot of time dreaming up a land acknowledgement to open my book with, and was really fortunate that my publisher didn't even bat an eye. Was like, yes, we'll do that. And that felt really important to me because I wanted to be able to be present and acknowledge that my story couldn't happen on this land and on anyone else's shoulders without the history that brought me to that place. But because my child narrator couldn't speak to that, I felt for a long time I questioned whether I should even write an Alaskan memoir. It gave me pause.
Did you have a turning point, like a moment when you felt that, just as you're a writer and you're solving problems, what was your turning point in solving that problem and landing on your answer, which is that land acknowledgement you're referring to?
Yeah, I think what happened was a phrase got pulled out of the book because it was the editors felt like it was maybe a little esoteric, but I had mentioned the 4th of July festivities in Petersburg can be like very exciting. Independence Day shenanigans get pretty hot. And then I mentioned, I can't remember what line was in there, something about how I wondered when my Alaskan Native friends would celebrate their first Independence Day. And it had to come out, and I really had wanted it there. But then I thought, if my child narrator can't speak to this, then I have to find a way to put it on the page.
What kinds of questions are you answering? Corinna, you had mentioned in your preface that each of your essays sort of are focused around answering certain kinds of questions. Is there some similar process for you that would dovetail with what Keema has said?
Yeah, my current book project, what I'm working on right now, is very interested in questions about colonial history in specifically northern Southeast Alaska and the borderland regions. We have this like multi-millennia long human history that connects the rainforest side of the mountains, which at this point is like the US side, Alaska, and the boreal forest side of the mountains, which at this point is Canada, so northern BC and southern Yukon is kind of the zone that I'm very interested in. And one of the things that I keep thinking is that our ecosystems are changing really fast. We absolutely have to get all of the eccentric, awesome thinkers we can at the table. Like, we absolutely need cooperation. This is, we can't afford to leave anyone out. But I think our greatest barrier to the really urgent cooperation that's necessary, and that I think a lot of communities are trying to engage in, as the greatest barrier that I can perceive to that, is our colonial history, which I see as a really shared history. And one of the global problems that I see in it is that, as a white kid growing up in judo, I didn't carry my share of that. Like, I didn't learn as much as I wish I had learned. I've spent a lot of time doing some pretty embarrassing catch up over the last, particularly over the last 3 years, but over the last 10 years for sure. And I just keep coming back to this idea: we can't change what has happened in the past, but we can certainly find ways to carry it together. Although it's actually not that simple for me to define what I mean by that. So that's what I want to land on. I mean, that's my big question that I'm writing through, is how do I and you, right, listeners, help carry our shared histories? Some of it's painful, we should chip in. So that's a question I work on.
That seems to be what literature does, right? I mean, literature allows you to have a much larger world. And it is a very important and basic, through all of time, kind of history as to who we are as human beings. And what both of you have talked about is that a particular light shines in some of the places that you are, which would be a northern lens, but those are only part of the truth. And if you went to some of the other places in the world, you would find, in our country, let's even stick to that, the kids are not learning what you didn't learn, except about their area. They're not having the opportunities to really confront, real life to some extent. In the larger sense, of course, people go through their issues that are hard, but I'm talking about in the larger sense. So what you're doing is really important because it shines a light on a particular place, which is unique but universal at the same time. And it's part of that fabric to complete the whole. And literature, for every part of that literature is important, because what we do at Alaska Quarterly on a smaller level, and the literature in lights, if you will, do in big ways, they're giving the readers and future leaders and thinkers, they're giving everybody a way to not only enter somebody else's shoes, but to have empathy for what it feels like to be in those shoes, and also to have some compassion. So, in both of the pieces that you read today, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of compassion in both of the pieces. And there's a particular lens that if folks don't respond to it, well, but you can also respond to the empathy that, is conveyed in both of your pieces. And I think that is really, really important. And ultimately, that's one of the reasons why I'm so delighted to have both of you. You do identify as Alaska writers, but at Alaska Quarterly, we say that we are of Alaska, but not Alaskan, in the sense that we are outward facing in what we do. But when you shine a light on something that's inside, doesn't mean you're not outward facing. It just means you're revealing something that actually may be really important for everybody else to see, which is how I feel about your work. So to sum up before we have to go, are there any final thoughts just for a second or so that each of you want to tie things together? And again, I want to thank you both very much. It's an honor to have both of you and to start off it's been quite a year, right? 2020 and 21 is pretty intense also. And it's really an honor to have you guys start off 2021 to 22. What we're doing with a lot of hope, right? We're having a kind of trust that it's going to get better somehow. And to start with you two, it reinforces that. So any final thoughts that you have about that you'd want to share about your work or tie things together?
Yeah, I would just like to add relevance, Alaska as relevant, as one of the things to just put on the table in this conversation. I personally, in my own work, I am compelled to center and privilege imagery that's inspired by northern biomes, and I'm compelled to center and privilege voices of northern speakers and scenes of life lived in the North. I take particular delight in doing this in a couple of the more global or multinational, or in any case geographically dispersed public conversations that I follow. I do find delight in highlighting northern examples. Again, it's kind of my sport, as I see it, to insist on Alaska's relevance to philosophic questions and political questions and conceptual issues. For example, art and representation, just as an example. So in a lot of ways, that's really what's important to me about place. It means that my thinking is always in dialogue with the North. Keema, I'm sure you have last thoughts too.
I love that. I love that so much. And particularly in thinking about access to Northern literature, Northern stories is limited in a lot of ways. And one of the regional complications is that so few Alaskans are on social media sharing their stories. And it makes it hard for stories to spread their wings and reach the rest of the country. And I don't know if this still happens to you, but I still have people asking me if I rode a sled to school. And I'm like, we're at an age where Google could answer so many of these questions. And I feel like there are so many more important ones we could be asking. So I love that. I love the concept of thought. I just want to, we are at pretty much at our time limit. I want to say thank you again, Ron, for having us here. This is really special. And Corinna, I'm so honored to be with you tonight. Thank you so much for sharing this space with me.
Back at you, Keema, and thank you, Ron.
So we will conclude with even a larger summary. Alaska is at a nexus of many things, isn't it? In terms of the environment, we're not the only place that's seeing the effects of global warming, but we see it very dramatically. Inequities, underserved populations, problems and extreme polarities. We certainly see it here. And so we're at a good place to be observers and to be warriors in favor of creating empathy, opportunities for it, and compassion. So with that, thank you both again. And I want to just say next time, which is October 8th, we have the beginning of a series that we sponsor with the Anchorage Museum, our host. 14 events that will span from October 8th to April 22nd. be moderated by Alaska State Writer Laureate Heather Lendy and me. As I said, the first event is Friday, October 8th. All the events of that series are 4 to 5 p.m. Alaska Daylight Time, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our October 8th event is coordinated with the Alaska Center for the Book, for their Book Week celebration. And it features fiction writers Waiki Wong and Kara Blue Adams. Waiki is the author of Chemistry, which was a big hit and exceedingly well reviewed. She's a recipient of many awards, and we had the opportunity to publish her when she was just starting out. She has her second novel, Joan is Okay, forthcoming from Random House in January. And Kara Blue Adams is another writer that has a book just out, and her book is You Never Get It Back from the University of Iowa Press. Alaska Quarterly published her title story, and she also is a young writer with many awards. So I hope folks can tune in, and I hope to see you on October 8th. And again, thanks to Keema and Corinna. Thank you very much. See you guys.